I think I said it last week, that use that same technique is doing it on the life of Jesus, and they're coming up with the very same thing. Jesus was a narcissist, Jesus was a liar, Jesus was this, that, and the other thing. Now, you call yourself a Christian when you write stuff like that. I'm thinking you are really on the wrong road here. Okay, that's why sorry to say, but I'm not a big fan of things like psychotherapy. I've gone for counseling in my life. Okay, because I went through trauma and stuff like that with bank robberies and things like that. So I've been to counselors, with that type of background. But further than that, yeah, I believe that prayer helps a lot. And then just talking to those near and dear to you as well helps you through those situations, people you can trust. So trying to reconstruct now, because one of the things I'm going to ask this guy, because I'm busy writing a thing to him. Okay, it's quite lengthy at the moment. One of the things I'm going to ask you, so 150 years from now, when somebody does a psychobiography about your life, what are they going to say about you?
Yeah.
Well,
Have you ever thought about that?
if they say stuff about Jesus Christ, he says everything that I do is from the Father.
Yeah.
So they are accusing the Father of those things.
Well, it's people who overthink things in the end of the day. People who want to justify their own human existence by trying not to relate it to a creator. And that's how far people go, the intellect. For me, I've got a book here. Will the doctors please sit down? Okay, and it talks about the doctor's theology. It's by a guy called Burkott, who writes about theology, theologians, and whatever. It's not an Adventist book. It was written by another guy who comes from the Anabaptist background, and he writes a brilliant book on theologians and people who have doctorates and theological doctorates, and just how they start to. Because you must understand, this type of theology comes from a Greek background. It comes from a Greek thinking. Does not come from a Hebrew thinking. Okay, so they're trying to force a Hebrew, which is a linear, into a circular Hebrew thinking. Doesn't work. And this is where these guys go horribly wrong.
Well, many years ago at BE, I did a thing on Ellen White, and it wasn't a PowerPoint. It was the only one I've done that was not a PowerPoint. And in there, I said that Mrs. White never claimed to be a prophet.
No, she
It's
didn't.
us that pin that onto her.
Mm,
She claimed to be the messenger for God's last people.
mm.
And that's what we have to see her as. She was not perfect, neither am I, neither of you.
Correct.
But she is a messenger for God's last people. And whenever you classify somebody as a prophet, you put them someplace where they may not deserve to be.
Yeah.
And then you can start criticizing people for it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. The thing is for me, once again, okay, to connect us, and like I said, um, I'm busy doing a thing out of this book, which is called Morals for Mortals, okay, which was written by Ron Pria, um, our illustrious doctor. Okay, this is actually a very good book that deals with morals for Seventh-day Adventists, and it deals on a wide range of topics. Okay, but it talks about the black and white. What will you do to justify a correct end? And I've used the example and said he didn't agree with me, and a lot of people don't agree with me. But there's a lot of other examples of what in what manner do you look at doing something to achieve an outcome? All right. So is stealing information from the Ellen White, if hacking the Ellen White estate, okay, gives you an answer that blows the top of Adventism, is that right or wrong?
Wrong.
It's wrong, okay? Because it's not the way Jesus would go about doing it. And Jesus is very clear about breaking rules and laws. Because rules and laws, although you might not agree with them, are still rules and laws of that country, of that organization or whatever. There's a lot of things we don't agree with in life because of certain rules. Governments make rules, etc. But we go along with them because as Adventists, we are advised not to kick against them. Okay, we are not anarchists. We are not going to torch. What did your guys do there in America? They went to your parliament buildings, that big thing that Trump did. Or they say, sorry, I probably got the history wrong there, but I watched something the other day. I never realized how many people actually walked up to that building. Was it it's not the Pentagon, the White House, or where was it?
The
Well,
And
Capitol.
people, Capitol,
They're
okay.
saying they stormed the Capitol, but it wasn't
Yeah.
storming at all.
Well, but once again, it's a perspective. Somebody's perspective of it makes it look 110 times worse, okay? And other people, it doesn't look that. So yeah, at the end of the day, it comes from perspective. It comes from how do you look this thing. But the Bible is very clear, okay? And there is no gray area with Jesus. There never has been. It's very clear. You do the correct thing, and if that correct thing then comes with the right outcome. If you ask the Lord's blessing, okay, and say, okay, I'm going to pray that I get certain information from the Ellen White estate, and approach them, and they give me the information. That's the correct way of doing it. But like that guy did in this, what was it, 2010, 11, 12, who hacked the Ellen White estate and got all the information. I know, I was still reading that guy's Facebook page and stuff and so on. And the Ellen White estate sued him, okay, which once again, yeah, she says don't sue each other, okay, but they did. And they won their case. They ruined the guy's life, which I don't think is correct either. But, what is right and what is wrong? Where do you draw the line? Because if you allow one thing, the next thing becomes easier and it becomes easier. And soon enough, we move so far away from the just pure morality that Jesus puts for us that we now justify anything to get a correct outcome.
Well,
And I think that's
sometimes, Hein, I think we try to do the work of the Holy Spirit.
Now you're talking.
We need to pray and let the Holy Spirit does what the Holy Spirit does. That comes from the Father and the Son. Let them do their job. We need to be a witness with our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes you just have to stand still. The one thing I've learned as an Adventist, somebody asked me the other day, so in the 10, 11 years that you've been an Adventist, what did you learn? It was actually somebody in church. I said, you know what I learned? Is to stand still, breathe, and not react.
And listen.
To contemplate and listen. I used to be right in front on the attack, okay, because I come out of a corporate. That's how I became successful. So that was what I was taught. So I was on the attack all the time. I would challenge, because I believed that was the right way of doing. That's how you operate in a corp. That's how you become a successful. And I was successful. And to an extent today, I'm successful in a different way. Because what I teach now today is to stand still, wait, contemplate, see first before you jump. Don't run through fire doors and fall off a cliff on the other side, which I did many times. Okay. I did. It's like, honestly, I think Diane needs to write the book on our lives because she has got a telephone book of stories to tell. Okay, that the woman is still with me after 35 years is an absolute miracle. So you need to pray for her, not so much for me. But, I have learned through Adventism such pure truths, such things that have such a profound influence on the way I live in a very secular and a very corporate world. And for people to go and write this muck, and it's muck, okay? I don't care if it's the absolute 100% truth. For me, it's like walking up to the lady, lifting her skirt and looking what knickers she's wearing. That's what he's doing. That's how profound this thing touches me. It's ugly. It's, no, let's just calm down. So,
Hein, a lot of times they do that sort of thing just trying to make a name for themselves.
That's true. He's got his 50 minutes of fame and he's trying to blow it on social media and so on. But once again, you know what? It will blow over like everything else.
I made an observation some years back, and that is you can react or you can respond. And once I learned how to respond, the buttons weren't pushed.
Yeah. And you can see I have to work at it. Okay. So that you need to pray for me for. Yeah, because I then think about Now, okay, what did she counsel on? So let me stand back. Let me use the counsels. Let me use, because it's to my advantage. Because on Friday I had such a hectic day at work as well, because suddenly a year before retirement I've become one of the most popular people around. Everybody wants my time. And when you out of the blue just get not even an invite, just a telling you you need to attend something because you're training this, that, and the other thing, and I'm going, ooh, where are you? I'm already booked full for six. I'm literally booked full for 6 months, and who are you? Yeah, and that was my first reaction. Okay, and then I in a moment I got angry, and I got so angry I was shaking. And then I phoned my manager. I said, listen, I just need to put off the computer because I need to compose myself before I write the email. Yeah. Okay, I'll write the email on Monday. Thank goodness I didn't write the email then. And I prayed and I went outside. I sat with my dog on the lawn. And then Diane came and and she calmed me down and I was okay. Okay. But
Well,
at my age, to get this angry at my age, when I was younger, it was like second nature for me. My doctor used to say, why is your blood pressure running at 155, 160 all the time? I said, well, this is how I live. He said, but it's not natural. You can't live like this. Well, I've lived like this my whole life. You need to bring it down. I said, well,
also, Hind, some of these things may be set up for like Marty said this morning, but to separate the wheat and the tares inside
yes.
church. And some of these things could be setting that up too. We don't know exactly what that's going to be or what it's going to be like.
Well, that's why I made the comment recently that you know what, and once again talking about the blue laws and the Sunday laws, I do believe they will come. But what I truly believe is that there's a lot more rocks before we get there. There's a lot of things we're looking sort of at the horizon, but we're stumbling across rocks. We are not seeing the attacks here, and that's one of the worst I've seen. Okay, we got to be aware and we got to be ready for them. Okay, otherwise we're never even going to get to the end. We're going to fall way before that.
It's like the Seventh-day Adventists. We look at National Sunday Law. Now, do we think that is going to be the only law that Satan attacks?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It's going to be all of them.
It's going to be all of them, and it already is all of them. And it really is. We got to be prepared for anything and everything. And we all think we've been around a while, most of us here on the screen. Okay, we know life. We've been in the church. We've been there. We've done it. Okay, so we think we've seen it all. Let me tell you, at 59, I am only now starting to really see what's going on. I said to Diane this morning, I said, you know what? I watched something last night that was so profound. A person giving their testimony and telling their story and whatever. And I thought, you know what? There's such a you have no idea how big the world is. We grew up in South Africa in a remember grew up in apartheid. It was very closed. The country was virtually sealed off from the world. And our thing was come out of school, go to university, get a job and work. That was it. Okay, go to army. So we did national service as well. We defended the country against what we call the Rooi Gevaar, the red danger, the Russians, the Cubans, etc., etc. So we fought the war against them on our borders. Okay, and that was our life. Okay, and before you knew it, you were 30, you were married, you had a child, and you were in your job, whatever. And then suddenly you reach this age that I am at, and you see things, and you see through your child that there's a whole world out there. There's like stuff you have never seen, places you've never seen, and YouTube makes that very, very nice as well. Okay, and especially if Sandy gives that picture of Terabella from the top, I was just amazed. Is that not the most incredible thing to see? The world has got so much good in it, so much stuff that really the Lord has created for us. And all we can worry about is tearing each other down, getting involved, and really, doing stuff that hurt people. And I said to them, next year, she's probably going to work for another 3 years. If I don't know, she wants to work. When I go on, I said, what I'm going to do is going to pack my backpack. I'm still not sure where I'm going to go. All right. But if I get on an airplane, I might land in California somewhere. Look out for me. Okay, I'll be the mad South African. Might go to Vietnam. It's one of the places I've wanted to go. I might go to Russia. Because in my time when I grew up, Russia was the place not to go. But today you can go there. There was a lady who visited South Africa recently who speaks perfect Afrikaans. There's a whole community of Russians that learned Afrikaans. I can tell you, what an amazing thing for people to learn the language that we so love in this country. Amazing. Anyways, I'm talking too much again. Sorry, Sandy.
I would like to say something about the criticism of Ellen White. Not only is it in the SDA community, I know one person that I've talked to him about it, and I've had enough. But there's out in the if you think the criticism is bad, the outside world really criticizes. There's a man that calls himself Tally for God, and he has some pictures of the groups of Ellen White in the 1880s. I think that's the era, 70, 80, somewhere in there. But anyway, he's trying to say that Ellen White was excuse me a second, I gotta look at my notes because I can't remember things. She was a Freemason, and yet she spoke out against these things. And he showed pictures of certain physicians, and like one was like you do this like this. I don't know if you guys can see that, but you put your 3 fingers inside your pocket or underneath your jacket, and the thumb and the small finger. That's one of like that. And that's one of the symbols of it. And they show men in the background like that, and it's very disturbing. And they even said on the graveside, they showed a picture of a pillar, and it's donated by the Freemasons supposedly. So I don't know who put that there. Somebody who died recently.
We also have to remember things were different. We did not live back then. We did not know the words they used. We did not know what the actual groups did. Maybe in the beginning they were evil, but a lot of those groups actually did good things, and maybe that's all she knew. I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there, but there's an awful lot of things people come up with, and people insult her, but they have no idea what it was. Even everything she said about everything, it was different in her day. So
yes,
we just have to have.
I'm in complete agreement with you.
Just keep going.
I'm in agreement with you, and we don't know what went on in that day. And some of those guys were coming out of early Freemason. Who knows? Nobody really knows what was going on then. And it's like a friend of mine who died said that nobody knows who put that pillar on that graveside. That was probably put a lot later. By, like I said, I'm saying maybe someone of still a Freemason didn't know. A lot of people didn't know about the things of what we know now of Freemasonry. So anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, well, a lot of that stuff is just gaslighting going on, so you can ignore a lot of it. But let's begin our service with Psalms 95, verse 1 through 7. And the Bible says, "Oh, come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God, a great King above all gods. His hand are the deep places of the earth. Strength of the hills is his also. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Oh, come, let's worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand." And of course, we're told to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, But the seventh day is Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is in thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Amen. All right, Kimber, I'm going to turn this back over to Marty.
So am I on now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, hopefully we can get things to work properly here. I've had issues some other times where I didn't know which buttons to push, but hopefully we'll get it up and going and it'll work okay. Let me see here. I'm going to go share screen. And let's see here. Let's try this. You see the screen there?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm glad it worked. I'm kind of skeptical sometimes of my online computer skills here, but I'm glad it's showing up. And we'll start with prayer and carry on. Our Father, we thank you for giving us this Sabbath. And we're thankful that in spite of distance between us, we can still be together as a group and learn together. And I just pray that you'd guide in what I share here, that it'll be informative and help us to understand how significant it is when you give instructions. And even though we don't always understand everything, we can trust that if we follow what you say, we'll be on the right track. Be with us now as we listen and think about what you've given us. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. So can you still hear me okay and everything's still all right?
Everything's fine.
Okay. Well, I have this verse here, Jeremiah 6:16. Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and you shall find rest for your souls. And there's a lot of people that think the old paths aren't good enough anymore, that we can just ignore all that old stuff and go on our way, and we'll figure out how to navigate through life with new ways. Well, God knows what he's doing, and many years ago he gave instructions, and we have the Torah, and we're going to hopefully learn some more today about how significant it is and how we can trust what he's given us. So I've titled this segment of the presentations Torah for Today, and we can think about, is the Torah relevant for today, or is it just a bunch of old laws and traditions and rituals that only applied to the Israelites 3,500 years ago? Because that's when it was given. I mean, this is old stuff. This is 3,500 years old. And does it really apply today, or doesn't it? Well, I have a few laws here that are actually on the books in various states right now. And we kind of read some of these and we think, well, does that really apply or doesn't it? Here's one that's on the Arizona books, and it's talking about a permit to feed garbage to swine. And it says, no person shall feed garbage to swine without first obtaining a permit from the associate director. All permits shall be renewed during January of each year. In Part B, this article shall not apply to any person who feeds only his own household garbage to swine, which are raised for his own use. And when I first read that, I thought, why would you want a law like that? I mean, pigs were designed to eat garbage. So why should you have a permit to feed garbage to pigs? And when we were over in India, spending some time over there, I I guess I'd never really appreciated pigs until we were over there. There were pigs everywhere, and they would clean up a lot of stuff that otherwise was really ugly and would pollute the environment. And even though I still don't really like pigs, I appreciated what they did for us over there. So why should there be a regulation on what you can feed them and who can feed them what and all of that? It just kind of is a little bit puzzling to me. Okay, here's another one. In Memphis, Tennessee, it is illegal for a woman to drive a car unless there is a man walking ahead waving a red flag to warn other people on the road. Now, does that really apply or doesn't it? I'm a little bit skeptical of that. You ladies, I don't think you really appreciate that kind of thing. Here's another one, and I wondered about this one. This is on the books in Oklahoma. It is unlawful for any person to promote, engage in, or be employed at a bear wrestling exhibition or horse tripping event. So it's talking about bear wrestling and horse tripping and what you can and cannot do in relation to these kind of events. And I thought, has anybody ever been to an event like that? You know, what really goes on there? And there's, you know, all these different specifications on bear wrestling or horse tripping. Well, I did a little bit of research, and you can see the picture there of Terrible Ted, the wrestling bear. He was actually quite a famous bear that was involved in some of these events. And so I was reading up on a little bit of what went on there. And back in the 60s and 70s, this was actually rather a popular thing in various states, mainly down south. But bears were apparently, they sometimes did surgery on bears to prepare them for an event like that, so that the person that was wrestling with the bear could have an advantage over the bear. And, you know, various things. Anyhow, these laws are actually designed to prevent that type of exploitation of the animals. And then I read a little bit about the horse tripping thing. And I thought, wow, no wonder there's a law against that. Horse tripping was an event where they would turn a horse loose in an arena or something, just, you know, let it run. And other cowboys on their horses would chase after it and try to rope its front legs to bring that horse down. And many times the horse was severely injured in the whole thing. They would get rope burns, they would get broken legs, they would have other kinds of injuries. And sometimes it was so bad that the poor horse that was the victim of it had to be killed afterwards because it was injured so bad from the event that they couldn't let it live. And so I thought, okay, there is a reason for this kind of law to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And so, you know, sometimes things look like they have no purpose on the surface, but actually there is a reason for it. And I learned a little bit about this law that got me thinking, okay, now I know why there's a law like that. But what about the Torah? All the different things that are in there, from Exodus right on through Deuteronomy, you know, how much of that applies to us nowadays? Well, here's some things that Ellen White wrote back in 1885. Apparently she was visiting over in England, and she saw some of the things that were going on there. And this is what she wrote about the conditions over there. Wealth means greatness and power. Poverty, little less than slavery. This is an order of things that God never designed should exist. Nothing of this kind was seen anciently among his people when he was their acknowledged leader. Valuable lessons might be learned by the rulers of today if they would study the plan of government given to the children of Israel. People were subject to misfortune, sickness, and loss of property the same then as now. But so long as they followed the instruction given by God, there were no beggars among them, neither any who suffered for food. Their wise governor, which is God, foreseeing that misfortune would befall some, made provision for them. When the people entered Canaan, the land was divided among them according to their numbers. and special laws were enacted to prevent any one person from joining field to field and claiming as his all the land that he desired and had money to purchase. No one was allowed to choose the most fertile parts for himself and leave the poor and less desirable portions for his brother, for this would cultivate selfishness and a spirit of oppression and give cause for dissatisfaction, complaint, and dissension. By the special direction of God, the land was divided by lot. After it had been thus divided, no one was to feel at liberty, either from a love of change or a desire to make money, to trade his estate. Neither was he to sell his land unless compelled to do so on account of poverty. And then, whenever he or any of his kindred might desire to redeem it, the one who had purchased it must not refuse to sell it. And if the poor man had no one to redeem it for him and was unable to do so himself, in the year of Jubilee, it would revert to him, and he would have the privilege of returning to his home and again enjoying it. Thus, the poor and unfortunate were ever to have an equal chance with their more fortunate neighbors. So the year of Jubilee, which was after every 49th year, was considered the 50th year. In the year of Jubilee, there was a law that said, if you lost your property, you'll get it back. It's not permanently gone. And so God took care of these people by putting laws in place like that. And here's a little more of the same, in the same article that Ellen White wrote. More than this, the Israelites were instructed to sow and reap their fields for 6 successive years, but every 7th year they were commanded to let the land rest. Whatever grew of itself was to be gathered by the poor, and what they left, the beasts of the field were to eat. This was to impress the people with the fact that it was God's land which they were permitted to possess for a time. And he specifically told them several times, you don't own the land. It belongs to me. You can use it, and that's okay, but you follow my rules. That he was the rightful owner, the original proprietor, and that he would have special consideration made for the poor and unfortunate. This provision was made to lessen suffering, to bring some ray of hope, to flash some gleam of sunshine into the lives of the suffering and distressed. Is any such statute regarded in England? Far from it. The Lord set needy human beings before the beasts, but this order has been reversed there, and compared with the poor, horses, dogs, and other dumb animals are treated as princes. In some localities, the poor are forbidden to step out of the path to pick the wild flowers which grow in abundance in many of the open fields. Anciently, a man, when hungry, was permitted to enter another man's field or vineyard and eat as much as he chose. Even Christ and his disciples plucked and ate of the corn through which they passed. But how changed the order of things now. If the laws given by God had continued to be carried out, how different would be the present condition of the world, morally, spiritually, and temporally. Selfishness and self-importance would not be manifested as now, but each would cherish a kind regard for the happiness and welfare of others, and such widespread destitution and human wretchedness as is now seen in most parts of England and Ireland would not exist. Instead of the poorer classes being kept under the iron heel of oppression by the wealthy, instead of having other men's brains to think and plan for them in temporal as well as in spiritual things, they would have some chance for independence of thought and action. So basically she's saying God's ways of doing things were put in place for the good of the people. And if those same principles were followed now, it would be for the good of the people. There would be a lot of benefit from following the things that God set up way back in those early days. Now, which of these is more important? The eagle or the baby? In God's viewpoint, the person is the most important. But what do we have today? Killing or merely disturbing an eagle can get you into big legal trouble, up to 2 years in prison and a $100,000 fine. But it's perfectly okay to kill an unborn child. There's been more than 62 million abortions since 1973. I think there's something wrong with that kind of a situation. God put humans above people, or I should say humans above animals. But things have been changed around. Here's something that Moses told the people back then. He says, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law, which I set before you this day?" He was reminding the people, God is very wise. He knows how to set up a government, and these are his ways of doing things. And when other nations look at the good laws that you have, they're going to admire these good laws. What nation is there so great that has statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law? And so he was just, reminding them, God has given you a good system. You can be proud of it. Don't throw it away. Back in Exodus 15, God said, "If you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and will do what is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee." Exodus 15:26. And as scientists and doctors have studied some of the mummies and other remains that they have found in Egypt, they have found some of the diseases that people back then had. And here's a listing of some of those diseases: heart disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which COPD, you maybe heard of it in that term, cancer, chronic kidney disease, cirrhosis, gout, rheumatoid arthritis, lower respiratory infections such as tuberculosis. These are the things that people in Egypt suffered from. And God says, if you follow my ways, I won't allow, or however you want to say that, you will not have the same diseases. And so he gave them health principles that would protect them from things like that. Okay, there's various health principles, various rules that he gave them. One of them was, "It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that you eat neither fat nor blood." Well, now, this wasn't just a ceremonial prohibition for those people. There are good reasons why they shouldn't consume fat or blood. So you could ask the question, okay, what are some of the related health conditions that come from eating fat and blood? Well, fat is the body's storage system. When there's too much of something, whatever it might be, it gets stored in the fat, whether it's hormones, whatever it is, it gets stored in the fat of the animal. And in the blood, there's hormones, there's all kinds of things that are in the blood of the animal. And God was saying, you don't need those in your system. Don't take that into your system. A lot of those diseases that I mentioned in the slide just before, the lifestyle related things, those could be eliminated and minimized by not eating the fat and the blood of the animals. Ellen White tells us that using flesh food increases the animal propensities. You've probably heard that expression. That's because the animal hormones are in their fat and in their blood. Animals that are in a slaughterhouse going through that whole process there are subjected to the smell of blood and all of the trauma that is going on in a slaughterhouse, and it creates stress and fear in the animal just before they get killed themselves. And all of that stress and all of that aggressiveness that is brought out is part of the chemistry of their fat and blood and meat. And when people eat it, they get all that stuff. And so there's good reasons why we really shouldn't eat any of the animal products, because what can you depend on to be clean and pure and decent that you find in the regular grocery stores. So there are good reasons why God gave those kind of prohibitions. Now, I've done some research into various places of information. One of the things that was very interesting, I got a book, and maybe some of you have seen this book. I don't know if I'm holding it in the right place right now. It's called None of These Diseases. And it talks about some of the health-related things that God gave to the Israelites, and what science and medicine has discovered in the last 20, 30, 40, maybe 100 years that support what God gave to those people. And there's some places online where you can find articles on similar ideas. And one of them is called Apologetics Press. And I found quite a few things there that are very interesting. Here's some of the things that I found written there. Moses penned the most advanced, flawless medical prescriptions that had ever been recorded at that time. Furthermore, every statement that pertained to the health and medical well-being of the Israelite nation recorded by Moses could theoretically still be implemented and be completely in accord with every fact that modern medicine has learned in regard to germ spreading, epidemic disease control, communal sanitation, and a host of other medical and scientific discoveries. The ancient Egyptians were renowned in the ancient world for their progress in the field of medicine. Dr. Massengill, who was a doctor from back in the, 20s or 30s or something like that, Dr. Massengill noted that Egypt was the medical center of the ancient world. During the days in the Medo-Persian Empire, the ancient historian Herodotus recorded that it was King Darius's practice to keep in attendance certain Egyptian doctors who had a reputation for the highest eminence in their profession. Thus, while the medical practices of the Bible could be equally compared to those of other ancient cultures and found to be flawlessly superior, comparing them to that of the eminent Egyptian culture should suffice to manifest the Bible's supernatural superiority in the field. Basically, what it's saying is the Egyptians were the ultimate culture of that day. They were the most highly educated. They were the most advanced in all of their stuff, especially in the realm of medical expertise and all of that. But when you look at some of the Egyptian practices, which we will look at here in just a little bit, you find out that what God gave to the Israelites was far superior. The entire Old Testament contains medical practices that would still be useful in third world countries without a hint of error in regard to a single prescription. So we're going to look at some of the medical expertise of the Egyptians and compare that with what God gave to Israel through Moses. Here is one document. It's called the Kahun Papyri, are a collection of ancient Egyptian texts discussing administrative, mathematical, and medical topics. Its many fragments were discovered by Flinders Petrie in 1889. He was quite a famous archaeologist, and are kept in the University College of London. This document was written about 1825 BC, which is around the time when Joseph was the prime minister in Egypt. Okay, this Kahun Papyri. Here's an excerpt from the introduction to this papyrus. Examination of a woman whose eyes are aching till she cannot see, on top of aches in her neck. You should say, now this is the instruction given for what to do for a woman whose eyes are aching. You should say of it, it is discharges of the womb in her eyes. You should treat it by fumigating her with incense and fresh oil, fumigating her womb with it, and fumigating her eyes with goose leg fat. You should have her eat a fresh ass liver. Now, will that have any effect on whatever her ailment is? This is some of the Egyptian medical expertise. Here's another one. The London Medical Papyrus, is an ancient Egyptian papyrus in the British Museum, London, England. The writings in this papyrus are of 61 recipes, of which 25 are classified as medical, while the remainder are of magic. It appears to have been written around 1629 BC, which is around the time when the Israelites were put into slavery, and they were suffering under that. So that's the time frame when this was written. And here's part of the introduction to this document. Behold, the darkness of the night enveloped the earth, but the moon cast her beams upon all the pages of this book, and it was brought to the treasury of His Majesty King Khufu. Okay, so apparently this document that was written with medical prescriptions and all that, and a whole bunch of magic, was brought to this King Khufu as a special gift of the moon, or something like that. You kind of wonder about the source of their wisdom. Here's another one. This one is quite well known. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is an ancient Egyptian medical text named after the dealer who bought it in 1862, and the oldest known surgical treatise on trauma. The document, which may have been a manual of military surgery, describes 48 cases of injuries, fractures, wounds, dislocations, and tumors. It dates from around 1600 BC, which is still around the time of the Israelites being in slavery. Ancient Egyptians thought epidemics were caused by disease demons. The Smith Papyrus provides this formula for protection. Okay, so here's what you need to do if you have whatever the disease is. This was to be chanted while a person had 2 vulture feathers held over him. O flame in his face, O Nekhbet, lifting the earth to the sky for her father. Come thou, bind the 2 feathers around me, that I may live and flourish, because I possess this white one. O Caesar of the Great One, son of Sekhmet, mightiest of the mighty, son of the disease demon, flooder of the streams, when thou voyagest in the celestial ocean, when thou sailest in the morning bark, thou hast saved me from every sickness. So do you think that'll be very effective for disease? I don't think so. But this was the wisdom of the Egyptian medical practitioners. Here's another one. The Ebers Papyrus is an Egyptian medical papyrus of herbal knowledge dating to around 1550 BC. It is among the oldest and most important medical papyra of ancient Egypt. The papyrus contains chapters on contraception, diagnosis of pregnancy and other gynecological matters, intestinal disease and parasites, eye and skin problems, dentistry, and the surgical treatment of abscesses and tumors, bone setting and burns. So this is quite an extensive document that gives all kinds of prescriptions of what to do for what. This document dates from around the time of Moses and the Exodus. It gives us a glimpse into the medical practice of what was the most advanced civilization in the world at that time. Here's a prescription for baldness. Apply a mixture of 6 fats from the horse, the hippopotamus, the crocodile, the cat, the snake, and the wild goat. There are hundreds of other prescriptions which include ingredients like statue dust, beetle shells, mouse tails, cat hair, pig eyes, dog toes, breast milk, human semen, eel eyes, and goose guts. To deal with a splinter, the ancient Egyptian physicians would apply a salve of worm blood and donkey dung. Can you imagine what would happen if you got that into an open sore? Yeah. So this was just shortly before the people of Israel left Egypt. This is the kind of medical wisdom that was in place at that time. And it was in this time in history when God gave His version of medical practice, the principles that are given in the Torah. There were things that He told them about quarantine, about bathing, about laundering their clothes, and these things have been in place for the Jewish culture for 3,500 years. And when later on in history, when medical practitioners applied the same principles, the same rules, they had better results. And these principles that God gave have proved effective with no conflict with the current medical wisdom. Here are some home remedies from the Bible. When Hezekiah was sick, in 2 Kings 20, verse 7, Isaiah said, "Take a lump of figs." And they took it and laid it on the boil, and Hezekiah recovered. Well, this was a fig poultice. This was something that actually works. You can take figs, you can take apricots, you can take other kinds of fruit, make a poultice out of them, put them on an injury or on an infection or whatever, and they help draw out the poison. There are all kinds of different poultices that work. There's herbal things. God gave those kinds of things rather than pig blood and whatever else. I don't know. Okay, Isaiah 1, verse 5 and 6. Why should you be stricken anymore? You will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, nor bound up, nor mollified with ointment. And that expression there, mollified with ointment, is referring to applying olive oil and things like that to soothe and to cleanse and to help the treatment of situations like that. And then we have the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10. And it says that, but a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, that is, came to where the injured man was. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. There again, these are natural things, oil and wine, and they would be cleansing, they would be healing. And these are the kinds of things that God wanted his people to do rather than using who knows what from whatever source they could find them. So these are some good home remedies that God, the same kinds of things that God gave to his people. Now here is a very sad story, but it goes to show what God's ways of doing things how God's ways can make a difference. It was in 1847 when Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis figured out that washing hands was very important in stopping the spread of infection. He was an obstetrician in Vienna, Austria. He was very upset that in his maternity ward, 1 out of 6 women would die after childbirth. His medical students would perform autopsies on the dead mothers and give their diagnosis, labor fever. Then they would rinse their hands in a bowl of bloody water, wipe them off on a common shared towel, and immediately begin internal examinations on the expectant mothers. And in reading a little more about this, there was basically he had charge of 2 different maternity wards. In one of them, it was kind of a training place for the medical students, and that's what it's talking about here. The other one was more of just an ordinary birthing place, and it was sometimes attended by midwives, but the death rate in that one, and they called them birthing, I forget the terms, but it was birthplace 1, birthplace 2, basically. And number 1 had a lower death rate than number 2, because number 2 is where they did all of this autopsies and all that. Well, it's describing what they did. The medical students would come in and they would be trying to learn what was going on here. But it says they would rinse their hands after doing the autopsies and then wipe them off on a polluted towel, and then go to doing the examinations on the mothers. And it said in what I was reading there, it said that the mothers would beg not to be taken into that particular maternity ward because the death rate was so high in there. They would sometimes give birth on the street rather than come into that maternity ward. Anyhow, so Dr. Semmelweis was watching this, and it really upset him because there was such a high death rate there. says he suddenly realized something that brought him ridicule from other doctors, but it revolutionized his maternity ward. Something unseen was being transferred from the dead women to the others and causing the deadly infection. Washing hands with a strong antiseptic between examinations brought the death rate of the women down from 18% to 1%. So he realized that something was going on here, and he had his medical students wash with a chlorine solution, and immediately the death rate dropped. Now, God had told the people back in Moses' time, he that toucheth the body of any man, the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. So God told those people, there's something about a dead body that is dangerous. You need to deal with it properly. And people didn't pay any attention to that. And Dr. Semmelweis was ridiculed by other doctors because they had never seen germs. You know, what are these things that you claim are being transferred from these dead bodies to these living mothers? There's no such thing. And they just ridiculed him to no end until he finally had so much trouble with this that he actually went insane and died in an insane asylum because they didn't believe him. And it's a really pitiful story. But God had given people the principles of health many years before, and if they would have only followed those things, they wouldn't have had the problems they had. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper and every one that hath an issue, and whosoever is defiled by the dead, both male and female shall ye put out. Without the camp shall you put them, that they defile not their camps in the midst whereof I dwell. So he was telling them, you need to quarantine people that have these infectious things. Well, they probably didn't understand the infectious aspect of it, but if they just followed what he said, things were much different. And from an article online that I found, in regard to the understanding of contagion implied in the quarantine rules in the Old Testament, McGrew, who was a doctor that wrote the Encyclopedia of Medical History, he noted in this book, the idea of contagion was foreign to the classic medical tradition and found no place in the voluminous Hippocratic writings. The Old Testament, however, is a rich source for contagionist sentiment, especially in regard to leprosy and venereal disease. So he's basically saying God gave those people ways of dealing with contagious problems, and if others would have followed these things, they would have been in much better condition. Here again, the Old Testament exhibits amazingly accurate medical knowledge that surpasses any known human ingenuity available at the time of its writing. Back in the time of Moses, they had no clue of what made things contagious. But God told them, do this. If you follow these rules, you'll be better off. This was an interesting historical note. When the Black Death, the bubonic plague, ravaged Europe in the 14th century, the entire kingdom of Poland was spared. And one explanation for this is the following, and this was one person's idea. This may explain why Poland didn't have the problems that other countries in Europe had. Poland had a lot of Jews, particularly in urban settings. Now, why were Jews less affected? It can be attributed to the sanitary practices of Jewish law. For instance, Jewish law compels one to wash his or her hands many times throughout the day. In the general medieval world, a person could go half of his or her life without ever washing his hands. According to Jewish law, one could not eat food without washing one's hands, leaving the bathroom, and after any sort of intimate human contact. At least once a week, a Jew bathed for the Sabbath. Furthermore, Jewish law prevents the Jew from reciting blessings and saying prayers by an open pit, at latrines, or at places with a foul odor. The sanitary condition in the Jewish neighborhood, primitive as it may be by today's standard, was always far superior to the general sanitary conditions. Jewish law also prescribes certain sanitary conditions related to the burial of the dead. Leaving corpses unburied not only abetted the conditions that spread the bubonic plague, but typhus and other diseases as well. The Jews, on the other hand, had a unique sense of community that not only led them to feel a responsibility to attend to the sick and dying, but caused them to always maintain a formal burial society, Kevra Kadisha, whose responsibility it was to make sure that any Jew who died was treated according to Jewish law, including washing the body before it was buried. These are only a few examples of how Jewish law preserved the Jewish people through this terrible dark period of plague. It imposed a sanitary standard on the Jew far above the ordinary sanitary standard that medieval Europe had. And so again, the Jews were following their laws that God had given them, and they had much better conditions than other people had. Even though people didn't understand why, it was obvious that that was the situation. Here's another statute that God gave them, having to do with sanitation. Thou shalt have a place also without the camp, and this is talking about an army camp when the army went out to war. Thou shalt have a place without the camp, whither thou shalt go forth abroad. Thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. For the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp to deliver thee, and to give up thine enemies before thee. Therefore shall thy camp be holy, that he see no unclean thing in thee, and turn away from thee. And so God was telling them, when you need to relieve yourself, dig a hole and cover it so that it's more sanitary. And Ellen White comments on that. Special direction was given to the armies of Israel that everything in and around their tents should be clean and orderly, lest the angel of the Lord passing through the encampment should see their uncleanness. Would the Lord be particular to notice these things? He would, for the fact is stated, lest in seeing their uncleanness, he could not go forward with their armies to battle. He who was so particular that the children of Israel should cherish habits of cleanliness will not sanction any impurity in the homes of his people today. God looks with disfavor on uncleanness of any kind. How can we invite him into our homes unless all is neat and clean and pure? So God gave rules and principles that we need to follow also. Here was an interesting verse from Haggai 2, verse 12 and 13. If one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt do touch bread or pottage, or wine or oil or any meat, shall it be holy? And the priests answered and said, no. Okay, so he's basically asking the question, does holiness transfer? And they said, no. Then said Haggai, if one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priests answered and said, it shall be unclean. So uncleanness transfers. They understood that. They may not have understood why, but they knew that it did, because that's what God said. But holiness or cleanness doesn't transfer. And then we have the verse in 2 Corinthians 6:17. Wherefore come out from among them and be separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And Ellen White comments on that. You are exhorted to touch not the unclean thing, for in touching this, you will yourself become unclean. It is impossible for you to unite with those who are corrupt and still remain pure. What fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? God and Christ and the heavenly host would have men know that if he unites with the corrupt, he will become corrupt. Ample provision has been made that we may be raised from the lowlands of earth and have our affections fastened upon God and upon heavenly things. And so God was giving him these health-related rules that not only regulated their physical health, but would also teach them about spiritual health. And they teach us also that if you're closely associated with the unclean, the ungodly, the impure, and all that, it's going to rub off. You know, it's just a fact of our sinful world where we live, that evil carries to others, good does not. We need to go to God to get the good, and we need to be careful of contact with the evil. Quarantine after childbirth. Now, this one is kind of interesting. Leviticus 12, verses 1 to 5. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. According to the days of the separation for her infirmity shall she be unclean. And in the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. And she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 3 and 30 days. Okay, so it's 7 days plus the 33 days. So that's a 40 days total. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. So if she bears a baby boy, she should stay home for 40 days until the days of her purifying are fulfilled. But then it goes on and says, but if she bear a maid child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, which is 2 times the 7 days, as in her separation, and she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days. So 14 days plus 66 days equals 80 days total. Okay, so what's the difference between a boy baby, she stays home for 40 days, and a girl baby, she's supposed to stay home for 80 days? Well, probably nobody in that time, and until recently, nobody had any clue of why there's a difference. But there is for one thing, when you read online about protecting children from contact with diseases and things like that, quite a few places will say it's best to stay at home to minimize contact with other people for a month to 2 months. And that's just kind of a standard principle that babies need to have time to build up their immune system and get to the point where their system can handle outside pathogens coming in or whatever. But it's interesting that there is some evidence that a boy baby's immune system develops quicker than a girl baby. And that's part of the reason why God was telling the people, if you have a boy baby, stay home for 40 days. If you have a girl baby, stay home for 80 days. Now, we don't know all the exact implications of all that, but there is some evidence that that is the case. Okay, now, circumcision. And it says, in the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Why the 8th day? Well, it has finally become fairly well established that after a baby is born, they have a certain level of what is called prothrombin, which is the blood clotting factor in their blood. But that decreases for the first couple of days down to about 33% or 35% of normal. So from the time they're born, their prothrombin decreases for the first few days, and then it starts increasing until on the 8th day, the level of prothrombin in their blood is at the highest level that it will be. It's over the normal level. 100% would be normal. On the 8th day, their prothrombin level is actually at about 110%. And so in order to perform the circumcision with the least chance of overly bleeding and things like that, the 8th day is the ideal time to do that. And that's kind of the standard knowledge now, that that is an ideal time. And of course, the traditional Jewish families will do it out on the 8th day. I know of a lot of Christian families that when they come to doing the circumcision, will specify, I want to do it on the 8th day. It's the best time to do it. Now, the people in that time probably didn't understand why, but just do it and it's the best time. So if they followed God's prescription, it was the best. Now, clean and unclean foods. This was some interesting information that I found that actually gives some scientific reasons why there are differences between clean and unclean meats as are given in Leviticus 11. In 1953, an extensive study performed by David I. Macht tested the toxicity of the meat of animals listed in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. Macht's technique was to place seeds of the white lupin, that's a plant, in fresh muscle juices of the various animals noted as clean and unclean in the biblical text. He would take a control group of seedlings that grew in normal solutions and compare that group to seedlings placed in the various meat juices. He would then record the percent of seeds that grew in the meat juices as compared to those that grew under normal circumstances. For example, when placing the seedlings in meat juices from the ox, the seeds grew 91% as often as they would if placed in the regular growing solution. Okay, the ox is a clean animal. So in its meat juice, the seeds would grow 91% as often as in an ordinary growing medium of whatever water or minerals or whatever were the other control solution. Seeds in sheep juices grew 94% as often as those in the control group in regular solution. Seedlings in meat juice from a calf, 82%, from a goat, 90%, from a deer, 90%. When several unclean animals were studied, however, they showed significantly higher levels of toxicity and much lower levels of seedling growth. Seedlings in meat juice from pigs grew only 54% as often as the control group under normal growing conditions. The rabbit, 49%, camel, 41%, horse, 39%, and these are all unclean animals. These results for larger mammals suggested that the biblical division between clean and unclean could have been related to the toxicity of the juices of such animals. And it's interesting, I don't have the information right here with me, but I'm sure you've heard of Walter Weiss. He has several lectures on clean and unclean foods and things like that. And in one of them, he goes through some experiments that he did that bring out some of the reasons why there are differences between these clean and unclean animals. Those that have the split hoof and that chew the cud are clean. Those that don't have both of those characteristics are unclean. And he explains some of the differences in their meat and some of that kind of thing. So you might want to check some of that out because it's very interesting, the information that he has there. Okay, this scientist, Dr. Macht, did similar research on birds, in which he found that extracts from biblical clean birds, such as the pigeon and quail, grew his seedlings 93% and 89%, while those from unclean birds, such as the red-tailed hawk, 36%, and the owl, 62%, were much more toxic. Okay, other studies included several different kinds of fish. The biblical regulation for eating fish was that the Israelites could eat any fish that had fins and scales, Deuteronomy 14:9. Those water-living creatures that did not possess fins and scales were not to be eaten, verse 10. In regard to his study on the toxicity of fish, Macht wrote, "Of special interest were experiments made with muscle juices and also blood solutions obtained from many species of fishes. 54 species of fishes were so far studied in regard to toxicity of meat extracts. It was found that the muscle extracts of those fishes which possessed scales and fins were practically non-toxic. Herring, 100%, pike, 98%, shad, 100%. While muscle extracts from fishes without scales and fins were highly toxic for the growth of Lupinus albus seedlings." Lupinus albus is the white lupin that he was using as his experimental plant. Well, you've probably heard of back in the days of the Pilgrims that the Indians taught the Pilgrims to fertilize their garden plants with fish. Now, what kind of fish they were using, I don't really know, but it's interesting that they used fish as fertilizer, and it maybe is kind of comparable to what he was doing here with his experiments. Now, on some of the same line of thinking, reptiles are included in the list of unclean animals. The large lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, sand reptile, sand lizard, and chameleon. Those are all part of the list in Leviticus 11. Immediately following this listing of reptiles, the text states, whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Leviticus 11:31. Interestingly, reptiles have a much higher rate of carrying salmonella bacteria than do most mammals, especially those listed as clean in the Old Law. The Center for Disease Control has repeatedly warned people about the possibility of being infected with salmonella passed through reptiles. As high as 90% of reptiles are natural carriers of salmonella bacteria, harboring strains specific to reptiles without any symptoms of disease in the reptile. While it is true that many pets can carry salmonella, the problem with reptiles, and apparently amphibians, is that they carry salmonella with such high frequency. It is prudent to assume that all reptiles and amphibians can be a potential source of salmonella. So, it's basically, the Bible says that these kind of creatures are unclean. Just avoid contact with them. Salmonella contamination can occur without even touching a reptile. If a person touches something that has touched a reptile, the bacteria can spread. The ARAV, the Association of Reptilian and Amphibian Veterinarians, made this statement: Salmonella bacteria are easily spread from reptiles to humans. Humans may become infected when they place their hands on objects, including food items that have been in contact with the stool of reptiles in their mouths. And from Leviticus 11, verse 32 to 34, we have this: anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. Now, it's interesting that it specifies that if it's an earthen vessel, it shall be broken. Basically, what that's saying is, if you have a vessel of pottery and you have some kind of solution or whatever that is sourced from an unclean creature, and it is in that vessel, that material can absorb those toxins, and you should not use that vessel again. You should break it and just get rid of it. Now, there's another place where it talks about vessels of metal or of similar types of things that can be actually scrubbed clean, and God gave directions. If anything that's unclean gets into that kind of a vessel, scrub it and do certain things, and you can still use it. But if it's a pottery vessel, don't use it again. So we have these kinds of directives on clean and unclean, and they maybe didn't understand why. There are some things about it that we may not understand, but we can trust that God knows what he's doing. And Moses made an end of speaking all these words to all Israel. And he said unto them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which you shall command your children to observe to do, all the words of this law. For it is not a vain thing for you, it is your life. And through this thing you shall prolong your days in the land, whether you go over Jordan to possess it. Most of us have heard these things. We've ever since we've become Adventists, we've learned about the clean and unclean and things like that. These are things that God told his people back in the time when they had no clue of why these were something they should do. But there were practical reasons for them. And science and medicine has finally confirmed the validity of these things in a lot of cases, not all of them. There's still some things we don't really know why God said those things, but we need to trust that God is smarter than we are. And he knows how our bodies work. He knows how disease works. He knows about all of these little things that we're just learning about. And we need to trust that if he's right on things that we've learned so far, he must be right on other things too. And we can trust that if we follow his ways, we'll be much better off. And like Moses says here, it is your life, and through this thing you shall prolong your days in the land. So even if we don't understand something that God has said, if it's a principle, if it's a guidance rule, we can depend on its validity and its value, and we need to carry through and do what God says, even sometimes when we don't understand. Now, last time I shared this about the Torah connection. I just bring it up again just so that you can have the references of how you can find this material online on our website. And so I just want to encourage you to study into the things that God has given. You know, there are so many things that we can learn from what he says, and just sometimes we just got to do what he says without understanding why, because he just knows the best way to do it. And so I've given a lot of these examples. A lot of them come from health-related things, and there's a lot of other things. We'll look into some of them next time, other things that apply. But we know that these health-related things apply. Ellen White gives us many reinforcements of these things, and so we can depend on what God has given us, that he knows what he's talking about, and we can safely do what he says, and we'll be much better off because of it. Let's have prayer as we close. Our Father, we thank you for the things that you've given us. There's many things we don't understand, but we know that we can trust you, and we just pray for guidance and wisdom as we go through our daily lives, that we will know how to live out the things that you've given us. Guide each of us and give us the wisdom that we need to know how to live our lives according to your principles. We pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you very much. That was excellent as always.
Yeah, are there any questions about anything that maybe you want some of the references to some of those things or whatever? Anyhow, anything that somebody wants to comment on or ask about?
About that last part, I can remember, oh man, 20-something years ago, going to a pet store with Christopher, and I saw where they had a sink by the Reptiles, and I thought maybe they were giving them a bath. I didn't know what it was for, but they had a little sign there that if you touch any of them, you have to wash your hands afterwards. And I mean, they were even finding it then, and they were talking about salmonella and stuff from the different reptiles and lizards and stuff. And I was like, that was really strange. And
there's reasons
God
for
knows, God knows everything.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
You know, salmonella, I spent my whole life working as an emergency nurse. When it gets infected in a wound, it turns kind of like a greenish, and it has a very particular smell that's different than anything you've ever smelled before.
Okay. And all those different animals that are specified as clean or unclean, we kind of wonder about that, and we think, well, why is that? What's the difference between this one and that one? Well,
we also talked about arbitrary laws on the books.
Well, I know in the emergency room, we would see in our small emergency room that we had, we would see 2 or 3 people every year that came in with worms in their brain. And the first symptom they have would be a seizure.
Hmm.
And this worms would be from that's pig meat that has not been cooked good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you would do a CAT scan and you would see them there. And I remember for quite some time, I took a picture with my cell phone of one of those, and I had it on my cell phone for a long time. And I showed some pictures at BE, I don't know, it's been 3 or 4 years ago, of some of those CAT scans where you can see them there. And when they treat them, what it does is it kills those worms, but those worms are always there for the rest of the person's life.
Oh, wow.
They don't come out. They just
They
die.
don't come out.
Oh, wow.
Well, I just got a text from Christopher. He's watching and he really enjoyed it. And you know, they just had their baby, the 8th. So anyway, he said, yeah, it really proves that God exists. For people back then to have such incredible ways of living healthy, it proves a higher power provided the knowledge. That was very interesting.
And we know that Mary, the mother of Jesus, still observed those purification, because it says in there when her purification period was over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, even when you eat chicken, you got to make sure that the egg is completely done. If you still eating eggs and chicken, I heard that in the chicken fat is where all the nastinesses are. So that should be removed before you fry your chicken even, because it's in the chicken skin.
Yeah, when we lived on the farm, we had chickens and we had, all the different creatures. And, a lot of people just assume that chickens are clean birds. But when you see what chickens eat, you really wonder, are they clean? Because they'll eat anything. And especially commercially raised birds, turkeys and chickens and all that. We don't have any clue what they're being fed. Whatever it is to fatten them up quick and get them to market as quick as possible. It doesn't matter whether it's decent stuff that they're eating or not. So I'm really skeptical whether chicken and turkey and some of those other common commercial birds are clean. The only ones that we know of are clean are doves and quail, because God allowed them to use them in their diet and in their services.
Doves and quail.
So something to keep in mind.
Something else I just got from Christopher, which I knew about from Elijah, their first baby. And the second one is Caleb Matthew. And he said, yes, Caleb will be circumcised exactly on the 8th day, just as Elijah was.
Okay.
Elijah, their first son. So both of them were. And I also heard, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but I heard that on the 8th day, something about their body is the least, they feel the pain the least or something. It's
The vitamin.
a good day to do that. And that always upset me, because when I had Christopher, I did not know that. And, they just did what they did. And I had no idea. And I remember calling the hospital and talking to them and just yelling at them, yelling and upset, because I'm like, you didn't give him anything? Well, we couldn't. He's too young. I said, excuse me, you went and cut him and you didn't give him anything? And I was just beside myself as a mother. I was like, that poor baby, all that had to hurt. So God knows, I'm sure it hurts if they feel anything, even on the 8th day, but not as much. So
I had no idea.
But like Kimber was saying, the 8th day, the blood clotting in their system is the highest it'll ever be.
right, but that's
so
nothing,
many,
I'm talking about the pain.
I know, but so many people here in America that, not Jewish, just American citizens, they'll have their babies circumcised, and most of the time they do it on the 3rd day, and a lot of them don't make it because they bleed to death. It definitely needs to be the 8th day.
Well, not everybody understands or knows that, so I'm not.
That's true.
I mean, I was one of them.
Bled to death. Oh my gosh.
But anyway, at least he was. So I thank you very much, Kimber, and we will see you again next week for a third part, and that's going to be good.
Okay.
So that was excellent.
I'm glad this system is working and that I've learned a little bit about which buttons to push at the right time.
Yes.
That's the reason Dave came over and did mine this morning, because I don't know how.
Yeah.
Well, when you keep doing it over and over again, you get accustomed to it.
Yeah, but this is the first time I've ever would have had to use it, so I didn't know how to do it.
I was circumcised, believe it or not, in a Roman Catholic church, or a church hospital, that is. And I found out recently from my brother that the sisters told him, if you want that done now, you have to go to a private agency or a private doctor. And they no longer do that. So, but I watched where I was brought into my mother. I got to watch it get torn down because it was so old, because it was made of clay and brick. So I got to watch it tear down. I took a piece